All right, well, I'll record a few of these news articles before we get started here. This one's pretty interesting, and it goes through the disinformation campaign that Putin's been executing on America for a long time. And he started out in the Russian military doing this and then continued it later, and he's very successful. They've been deliberately feeding us false information for quite a while, telling people not to take vaccines, telling them that diseases are created by the US military and so on. And they're really quite effective, and they're very skillful at manipulating social media and other techniques to spread these things. So the Western states packed, Washington, Oregon, and California are going to work together to deal with opening up after coronavirus. I think this is a very good idea. And there's a similar one on the East Coast. It certainly seems to be the general case across the nation that most people are very distrustful and unhappy with what the federal government has done about this virus, and very happy with their own state and regional officials. I certainly am. By shutting down San Francisco quickly, they seem to have kept the number of cases here to a very small level. So I'm all for this, and this does seem to be the way to do it. Let the states, and perhaps a few states working together, do it their way, rather than waiting for the federal government to do something that wouldn't really suit us. Here's a very good article from Coalfire. Very nice, explaining how they decided to test to see whether 3D printer was vulnerable, and they found it to be extremely vulnerable. And they explain exactly how they exploited it. This would make a great project for a class like 127 where we're doing this. He found that this thing updates over an HTTP connection. So all you have to do is man in the middle, send the traffic elsewhere, and you can now put poison firmware on it. So he found the firmware. They don't tell you where to get the firmware, but if you just watch in Wireshark, you can see where it's going to get the firmware, and then you can go to that website and download it. So it's not actually concealed behind a password or anything. Then it took them a while to figure out how to get root access to the printer, but they figured that out after trying a few things. And after they had root access, they then they made in order to get root access, they made Metasploit load. Metasploit was able to make an ARM-based payload, which is interesting to me. I didn't know Metasploit could do that. And off they go. So it's really very nice. He explains how he did all these things, and it's following the very standard exploit development path that we're covering in our classes. Here's one I was pretty interested in. There's a lot of movement now to use cell phones to enforce quarantines in America. This is the one very popular idea from among technical people is to put an app on your phone, and it will keep track with Bluetooth of who you've gone near. And when people get tested positive for the virus, they'll tell their other people they've been exposed. But people are very unhappy with that. 70% of Republicans and 46% of Democrats strongly oppose that idea. So there is a serious problem with trusting the government or whoever's going to handle that data that would have to be overcome to do that. Anyway, let me just get on to the official stuff here. Although, if we don't get any more customers, I won't be able to do the Cahoots. But anyway, this is the end of basically the Net Plus review part of this course, this chapter 4. And so I think A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay, we are here. All right, so I'm going to talk about the secure devices and protocols. So devices are simple. The OSI layer 1 is just cables connecting things together, and repeaters are an old system just to move make traffic higher voltage to go down a longer length of cable. Hubs are what were used after that would connect many devices together and just echo all the data directly out, paying no attention to the addresses. And those are things that operate at layer 1. Bridges were the original layer 2 device, which would be a network bridge in the middle that would learn what MAC addresses are on the left and what MAC addresses are on the right, and it would only send the traffic to the correct network segment. Switches are what we all have pretty much settled on as the standard device now. The switch is just a multi-port bridge, so it learns what MAC addresses are out every cable, keeps a local switching table, and every time it gets a frame, it forwards that frame to just the right device, so there are almost never any collisions. VLANs are, essentially universal use at companies now, although not usually at homes. So you can add an extra tag and separate a physical local area network into multiple virtual local area networks. So these devices would be on one VLAN, and they would be treated as a different local area network than this one. And that would help isolate things like broadcast traffic, and is used to make, it's the beginning of software-defined networking, where the virtual network topology is different than the physical network topology. Now, if you have this kind of arrangement where you have a bunch of computers plugged into ports, one thing that people are concerned about is a tracker could sneak into the building and plug their laptop into the port and then attack your network. So one way to prevent that is port security, where you specify the MAC address that has to go into that port, and only that particular device can connect. Another way to do it is to just isolate all the users from each other. This is what Starbucks does and City College on the wireless network. Every user is on their own private VLAN, so you cannot have direct contact to other users. That's port isolation. All right. Span ports are ports, you'll have one port on a managed switch that makes an extra copy of every frame, and the idea is you can use that to monitor the network traffic with a tool like Splunk or something else that monitors the traffic. It turns out to have its limitations, of course, because if your ports are all, say, 1 gig and the span port is 1 gig, then it might not have enough bandwidth to really copy every packet, every frame, I should say. So you may not be able to capture every frame in a span port, but for low levels of traffic, it should work. A device intended to solve that problem is a network tap, a special device added to the network to make an extra copy of all the traffic passing by for monitoring purposes. And those are more efficient. Routers are at layer 3. Their purpose is to move traffic from one local area network to another based on IP address. So therefore, they have to have routes. Your router has to have a routing table, and it has to know what networks it can reach out its various ports. The simplest technique is a static route, where you just have someone type it in by a network manager, which is appropriate for perhaps a small network like your home network, where you probably just have one gateway out, and that's the default route. But at a large company, like an ISP, this technique is too burdensome, and so they use dynamic routing. Now, here's what the home network typically looks like. You have 3 laptops down here with local IP addresses, and then you have a router that has 2 ports, one local and one to the internet, and it can route from the local addresses to the external address, and you just manually type in the addresses on that one device. All right. Somebody new has made it. Good. All right. So all right. So for large companies and ISPs and such, you can't put in static routing, so you use dynamic routing. You have multiple routers out there, and they're all connected to various other devices, and they send traffic over the network telling each other what networks they can reach and dynamically adjust that. And so if you connect a new network or a router or an interface goes up or down, and therefore the routing options change, it will send data mixed in with the network traffic, and it will take, after some period of time, it will have finished informing all the other routers, and they will all have updated their routing table, and that's called convergence. And the efficiency of a routing protocol is primarily determined by its convergence time. There are interior gateway protocols used inside companies like RIP and OSPF, and there's an exterior gateway protocol used on the global internet to communicate between companies, and the only one in use that I've ever heard of is Border Gateway Protocol. The original routers were very simple devices with very small amounts of memory and weak processing, so they used distance vector routing protocols, where they did not know the entire map because they were too weak to remember that. So they would just know how many hops they had to go. To reach AT&T, go 2 hops out this port. To reach CCSF, and go 3 hops out that port. That's all they would know, is which direction to send the packet, and a very simple measure of how far away it was by just counting hops. And that was enough to generally send most packets in the right direction, but it was not very efficient. And so you had routing loops. What would happen is updates, the routers could get confused for a period of several minutes at a time and send traffic the wrong way. So you would get things like this, where it sends traffic to 101 and back to 103 and back to 101 and back to 103, because the routers at the ends are confused. They think, oh no, you've got that network. No, you've got that network. No, you've got that network. And this will go on until this inefficient routing protocol eventually informs them both of what's going on. RIP was the original one, routing information protocol, and it could take up to 30 seconds to send an update, and sometimes an update from a router with old information would overwrite the new information that the router had just figured out. And so it turned out that it was not very efficient. Eventually it will converge, but it can spend quite a while before convergence, sending packets the wrong way. So there were a bunch of measures put in to try to improve it. Split horizon would cause routers to try to prevent routers from passing out-of-date information back. Poison reverse would tell it not to send mark some bad routes. It would hold a router for 3 minutes before changing it, so that it wouldn't flap up and down thinking this route is good. No, this route is bad. No, this route is good. No, these were all clumsy attempts to try to improve the routing protocol. But the much better solution was to go to link state routing protocols and have more powerful hardware in the routers. So each router can just have the entire network diagram and know what's going on. And then it just has to adjust the state when the link state changes between here. This is much better than RIP, and it works fine on modern hardware. OSPF is one of the links, is one of the modern this link state routing protocols. So this is converges much faster than RIP. There's a proprietary one called EIGRP available only to Cisco routers, but OSPF is the open standard. All right, and then there's Border Gateway Protocol, which is used on the global internet, and this routes between ISPs and large companies. And that is a path vector protocol. It combines the two other features. And as we've talked about in the news many times, there are many people who poison BGP in order to cause traffic to be misrouted across the global internet. Now I've got Cahoots, but I don't think I'll do them if I only have 2 live students. I'll put them off till next time. We'll see if we get more then. Anyway, then there's firewalls. The point of firewalls is to remove bad traffic from the network. So the simplest, earliest firewalls were just packet filters. You would just have, all they would do is look at each packet in isolation, and you'd filter it by something like whether it's incoming or outgoing, and by something like the port number and the protocol. So for example, if you wanted to allow your people at your company to ping a remote server, you'd have to configure your firewall to let ICMP echo replies back in. And that means an attacker could send an unexpected reply, and your firewall would let it through, because your firewall has to judge each packet in isolation. It doesn't know that this reply has not been requested from the inside, because your router is what's called stateless. It forgets everything. It makes a decision based on one packet at a time. So the next step up in firewall is supposed to add a state table to the firewall. So it notices if you have requested something and you are in a state of having opened a session there. So this echo reply that you asked for will come through, but this echo reply that you didn't ask for can be blocked. That's the improvement brought with stateful firewalls. Then there are proxy firewalls, which do not let you make any direct connections to the internet at all. You ask for data, and your request ends here, and the firewall, the proxy goes off and fetches it if it's in accordance with your company policy, and then you look at a copy of it, but you never make any direct connections to the outside at all. This way, all the internal network addresses are concealed, and it also means you can block things like URLs you don't like and so on. All right. There are circuit level proxies that operate at layer 5 to carry traffic around. And the most common one you hear about is Tor, using a SOCKS proxy. So it can route all your traffic of various different protocols through some other server to hide your origin. Another thing that used to be used was a bastion host, sort of before modern firewalls. You would have one server on the outside of your network that was the gateway, and that would have to be particularly hardened, and everything would connect through that. Another thing you might have is dual homed hosts, where you have a trusted network here, and your internet users have to first log into this host and then get into the trusted host from there. This is, again, nowadays, the most common thing occupying this role would be a VPN concentrator, where you have to prove that you are authorized before you get into the trusted network. Here's a screened host architecture where your router would force all traffic to go only to the bastion host, and you would then access the LAN only through there. And there's DMZ. These are still commonly used. You'll have the external internet You'll have an external firewall that has a relatively liberal policy, so it just stops the most obvious attack traffic. Then you have your public servers here that the whole world should get to, like web server, email, and FTP. And then you have a more strict internal firewall that makes sure that you're really an employee. And then you go to the trusted network from there that has your confidential documents and such. You can do that with one firewall too. You can have a firewall that has a set of rules to reach here and a more strict set of rules to reach here. It amounts to the same thing for all practical purposes. All right, so you have a modem is what you used to use to get on analog lines, and now you have a cable modem to get on cable lines. This takes your computer traffic and turns it into analog traffic that can move through those wires. DTEs and DCEs are used for WAN protocols like serial line protocols. And these typically are ones that are controlled by a clock rate from the ISP. And there's a CSU, DSU is another piece of equipment used to synchronize those signals. So there's various kinds of secure communication types to talk about: authentication, VPNs, and remote access. So for authentication, in the earliest days, you would just use PAP, Password Authentication Protocol. You would just send your password over the wire to the other end. And this, of course, works, but the problem is your password is traveling through an untrusted network without any encryption, and that's really insecure. Anybody can steal it. So to improve that, they went to challenge handshake authentication. The server would send you a challenge, like a few random letters. You would add the challenge to your password and hash that, and then send the hash over the network. The server would do the same thing at the other end, so it could tell whether you got it right, but an attacker sniffing the network would not be able to easily see the password, although the early versions of this did use somewhat insecure hash functions, and it was sometimes possible to deduce the password from it, but at least it was better than sending the password unencrypted. 8021X is another technique that has a variety, is a protocol that lets you use a variety of authentication protocols here. And the general idea is you connect, first you connect to an authenticator. The authenticator has a radius server, which has credentials on it. So it checks the radius server to see whether your credentials are valid. And only after you've finished with that authentication will it then grant you access to the internal network. And this is a umbrella protocol that can support many kinds of authentication, some more secure than others. So you can have EAP MD5, which, as you might imagine, is pretty weak because MD5 is a pretty weak hashing function. Cisco made a version called LEAP, which was their attempt to improve the wireless web encryption. And it was an improvement, but it wasn't as good as WPA and is no longer recommended. EAP Fast was another Cisco technique, which is considered better. And EAP TLS uses good old transport layer security, which is what we all use for HTTPS, and that is considered very secure if you use the more recent versions. EAP TTLS is another one, which is a little bit less secure than EAP TLS, but still considered pretty good. And this one I think came from Microsoft, PEEP, Protected EAP, but all those are considered pretty good. Again, I'm going to skip the cahoots. And we'll mention VPN protocols. The point of a VPN is to connect to a corporate network as if you had a wire going to work. So you want to create the situation as if you were at work connected physically to the network. So you're hoping to make a secure link, but you don't want to pay for a T1 to go to your house. You want to go to a coffee house or something and share a network. So you want to use encryption to create the privacy that you would get by owning the wire and having only one user on the wire. So SLIP was the early one with no encryption at all that would route the traffic but not encrypt it. So that's not very practical anymore. PPP protocol was the replacement, which can have encryption and confidentiality and integrity controls. So that's good. PPTP was a huge hit. All versions of Windows have it by default. Most versions of Linux has it. There's an app for the Mac. You can totally, might even be default on the Mac. It's a very common protocol, but it's pretty old and unsafe, but it's easy to set up. Point-to-point tunneling protocol. L2TP is a newer one, but this does not provide any encryption. This merely transports the data, but what people typically do is take L2TP to transport and encrypt the data with IPsec, which is a new protocol and considered quite good. So L2TP combined with IPsec is considered one of the most secure VPNs available these days. It's just a little hard to set up. An IPsec is a complicated encryption scheme that has two protocols, one called ESP and one called Authentication Header. And there are various ways to define it. You can do host to gateway, which is probably the most common, where you would have your laptop and you're connecting to a corporate concentrator, or point to point on your corporate network, or direct host to host. So you have your original packet that's got an IP header in the data, and if you put it in transport mode, it retains the old IP header and protects the data with encryption, or you can use tunnel mode, where it takes the entire packet and encapsulates it in another packet. For most practical purposes, they have essentially the same results. Anyway, SSL was the original protocol invented to encrypt web traffic by Netscape, and it is now, all versions of SSL are now considered unsafe and deprecated, but TLS is the replacement, and TLS is considered quite secure if you use the modern versions and you correctly implement it. All right, so there's remote access. If you want to connect from a distance, ISDN was one of the earliest ways to serve up internet connections to homes. Had this basic rate interface and primary rate interface that, as you can see, is extremely slow, like a dial-up modem. DSL was much more popular, and a lot of people are still using this. DSL can get pretty fast, and the only problem with DSL is you have to be near to the main ISP's switching station. It falls off with distance. Cable modems are extremely popular. That's what I've been using. You get a cable TV wire. If you live in a city, you can get one. If you're out in the country, you probably can't get a cable TV wire, but if you can move a lot of bandwidth over the same wire that carries you cable TV signals. An old-fashioned system to protect your security was callback. You would call into the company, and it would hang up on you and call back at your known phone number to make sure that's really you. This is a very simple form of authentication. A much weaker technique is to use caller ID, where it just looks at the caller ID in your phone call. That sounds like it would be the same thing, but it's not, because the caller ID can easily be forged, whereas calling you back is harder to fool. RLogin and RSH are old ways for one Unix server to connect to another Unix server. In the early days, they used clear text. Now there are more secure protocols used for it. There are two graphical remote access protocols. VNC lets you move graphical desktops over, and commonly used on Linux servers. RDP is what Microsoft uses. It's a licensed version of Citrix, which is extremely popular. And this lets you control Windows machines remotely, and you get a full desktop. You can use the mouse and all that stuff. There are third-party products like GoToMyPC and LogMeIn that do the same thing. And they connect nicely through firewalls because they use a central server. All right. You can also go all the way to where you don't even have a whole computer in front of you. You just have a client, and everything is stored on the server. You have a virtual desktop infrastructure. So your operating system, your desktop, your favorites menu, your browser settings, everything is really on the server, and you're using your machine just as a portal to access the server. This is popular at highly secure companies because there's no local data for you to have stolen by malware, and everything is all on the server where it can be backed up and protected. And if they want to change a version of a software, they just do it on the server. Your software is not installed locally anyway. So this is pretty popular at highly secure companies, but of course it means that your network connection has to be good or you can't get anything done at all. But that's pretty much true for everybody these days anyway. Screen scraping is one technique to take the graphical information from your screen and send it off to a remote user. Then there's instant messaging for instant chat. Internet relay chat was probably the first one. Before there was really before there was the World Wide Web, there was internet relay chat used by people who were sharing the same Unix servers. This is still used by people that got involved in it long ago. AOL Instant Messenger came later. ICQ has been around for a long time. These are other ways to chat from person to person. Most of these were never secure enough for company use. They were designed for home users, and they had a lot of vulnerabilities, code injection vulnerabilities and such. and ways to share files that could be used to share confidential files. They're not generally recommended for company use. GoToMeeting by Citrix was a remote control client. There was another one called PC Anywhere. These all do the same thing as RDP, but they're just third-party clients that do it. So you can share slides, share files, remotely control the machine, and some of them had no encryption. Aha, now we got 4 people. We might go do these cahoots for the last one anyway. Maybe I'll do them all. Anyway, so PDAs, before we had the smartphones, they were PDAs, like the BlackBerry and so on. Now everybody's gone to iPhone or Android. And they have a lot of security issues, of course. Your whole device might be stolen. You can put malicious apps on it. You might carry it around and put it on untrusted wireless networks. And so there's a whole lot of issue of mobile phone attacks. There's a wireless application protocol designed to provide secure web services, but this seems to have pretty much vanished a few years ago and not to be too relevant anymore. And the last one is there are content delivery networks. When you connect to a website these days, you are, in the first place, all the web servers are virtual. And in the second place, you're probably connecting to a local copy of the page, not the real page, because it's much cheaper to rent servers from Akamai or Cloudflare to carry copies of your data locally so customers don't all come to your main center. Anyway, now that we have 4 people, let's do the cahoots. There's 3 of them, and might as well do them. They're probably no good if I put them off. So it's going to be these ones here. I've got I, J, and K, and we'll just do them all. So make this big. I said make it big. Right. There we go. Good. See if I can get enough people. If I can get 4 people to do it, it'll be better. Ah, good, at least 3. Get tested. Ah. Oh, perhaps you mean for coronavirus. I was thinking of certifications of IT certifications. Are we going to get another like Rajesh? Aha, we're up to 4 people. Oh, good. That's what we're going to have. Good. All right, so which one is it? OSI layer 5. SOX proxy. All right. Okay, what firewall uses only the headers of the packets? That's a packet filter, the simplest old-fashioned firewall. All right. Which one of these is vulnerable and should no longer be used? Leap was Cisco's protocol, and a hacking tool that hacks it is called a sleep. All right. And which system gives you port-based access control? All right, it's 8021X. Lets you specify the MAC addresses at ports as one of its several modes of operation. So, Alex and Ampero and Jesh, which is Rajesh, I think. Good. All right. Good. I know who the people are. Good. Let me just make a note of this. All right, I've got the names. Let's go on to the next one. All right, that was I. Here's J. I like the music. Missing somebody. Phil. You had 4 last time. Ah, there we are. Good. All right. All right. So, which one goes on 3389? That's Microsoft RDP. Everybody knows that. That's good. All right. Which one provides transport, no encryption? Yeah, that's layer 2 tunneling protocol. By itself, no encryption. What IM system has been around since the 80s? IRC, the original early one. Good. Internet Relay Chat. Which protocol is old and unsafe on this list? PPTP, the old one Microsoft popularized. Easy to set up, but out of date and no longer trusted. So Alex is a double winner. And then Faro. And that's all right. Good. Same folks won again. That's good. Well, I got one more of these. All right. Whoops. Wait, I have to leave page. All right. So it is. We are to do J. I feel like we skipped H. Let's take a look at H. It's either H or J coming. See if this looks familiar. I'm going to move this over here. There, I can check it. While you guys are signing up, maybe I can see if it's the right one. It ought to be J that we're doing, but I think I already did J. There, this one here. Oh no, this looks okay. All right, good. Did them in kind of a different order than I expected, but this looks like the right one to do. All right. Yeah, so what device at OSI 3? Okay, that's a router, good. Oh, people are saying switches are at layer 2. Routers are at layer 3. All right, which protocol used hop count? That's RIP, the original routing protocol. Very clumsy and old-fashioned. All right, what device moves packets from a local area network to the internet? That's what routers do, good. All right. And what's the interior routing protocol that converges rapidly? OSPF. And nobody got it right. BGP is an exterior protocol used over the internet, and RIP is slow. DNS is not routing. It's open shortest path first is the open source free interior routing protocol. All right, let me get my recorder to record these winners. All right, so which is Phil, okay. Phil, and Amparo is up to 9. And Jesh is up to 9. Okay, good. So I got the winners. All right, I'm going to stop the recording. I'll leave the share going for a little while, however, in case anybody